What's up, mobile devs? Today we are going to build together from scratch this amazing color picker animation inspired by the color picker animation on the Telegram app. So in order to build this animation right here, we will need, of course, the PanGestureHandler, the TapGestureHandler, the with spring and with timing functions from Reanimated. And in order to update the color right here, we will use, of course, the interpolateColor function. So I have already made a specific video for each subject, so a specific video for the PanGesture, the interpolateColor function, and so on and so forth. And I think that these videos can help you a lot to understand actually this example. But don't worry, I will build from scratch and I will explain everything on this specific example. By the way, I will also put the videos in the video description if you are interested. So let's start actually this example and let's get our hands dirty. Here I've created a React Native project with the Expo CLI. I've already defined some constants, so the color and the background color. The color array will be used to fill actually the linear gradient of the color picker, and the background color will be used instead to handle actually the background color of the entire screen. So in the package.json, I've already installed actually the Reanimated package as always. I've also installed the React Native GestureHandler package in order to handle the pan and the TapGestureHandler. And actually, in order to handle the gradient, I've installed the Expo linear gradient package. So let's actually start to build our code. So the first step, in my opinion, is to divide the entire view in two different views. The first one will wrap the circle, and the second one will wrap the picker. So let's define the first and the second view. So the first one will be our top container, and the second one will be our bottom container. So let's actually update here the style. Let's define the top container and the bottom container. So here we need the background color. So we can see that the first here we have the first view and the second view. The background color is defined here. So the second view will wrap the color picker. So of course the first view needs to be a little bit bigger than the second one. And in order to do that, let's specify flex 3. So in that way, the first view is covering actually the 75% of the screen height, and the second one is covering the 25% of the screen height. So the second view will actually wrap the color picker. So let's wrap effectively the color picker component. So we need to specify actually the color picker component. So as we can see, React Native is complaining about the color picker right here. So let's create actually the color picker TSX. So I'm using the React Native snippets. Let's change a little bit the syntax and let's export the color picker component. So here we can import it. So basically, of course, we need to pass the color array to the color picker. So this array right here. So let's actually specify the color picker props. And let's say that we want a color array of type string. So the color picker will be a React functional component with the color picker props, and it will use the color array. So right now we can already start actually to use our gradient. So let's use the we will use the linear gradient from the Expo linear gradient package. and let's specify the colors. So here we go. What's the issue right now? Of course, we need to use the colors with the lowercase c. So let's specify actually the style. We want actually a height of 50 and a width of, let's say 90% for now. So here we can already see actually the linear gradient. We don't want a vertical gradient, we want an horizontal gradient. So we need to define the start and the end property. So to the start property, we need to specify an x and a y value. So basically x equal to 0 and y equal to 0 is this point right here. And let's define the end of the gradient. We want basically that the x is right here. So x equal to 1 will actually cover the 100% of the linear gradient width. So here we go. So what I usually like to do is to define these properties from the external component. So in order to do that, let's copy this stuff right here. Of course, we need to specify that we need actually 3 additional properties: the start, the end, the style, and of course the colors from the linear gradient. And in order to do that, usually I like to extend the linear gradient props. So here we don't need colors. So basically the linear gradient props are wrapping the colors prop, the start prop, the end prop, and the style one. So we can take the start and style, and we can actually assign right here start and style. So here we go. Of course we want actually to align center the color picker. So in order to do that, let's add align center, align item center, and justify content center. And let's actually extract this style right here, and let's call it gradient. So here we go. Just the final touch is to actually let's actually use the screen width from the dimensions API instead of specifying 90%, because we will need later the picker max width. So let's say picker width equal to dimensions get window multiplied by width multiplied by 0.9. So let's actually define the screen width right here. So here we go. We need, of course, to pass the width here. Let's add just the border radius. And I think we are good to go for the setup. Just height of 40 is a little bit better. So what is missing? Of course, we want actually to define the picker itself inside the linear gradient, so the white circle. So let's actually define this white circle. We will, of course, you can use a lot of ways to define the picker. What I usually like to do is to use the absolute style. So let's wrap everything inside a view. And let's specify here the our picker. So this view right here, this component right here will be our circle. So let's say style, style.picker. And let's define it right here. So we will use the position absolute. let's define actually the background color as white. And let's define the picker circle picker size. Let's say 45. So width will be circle picker size, height will be circle picker size, and the border radius will be circle picker size divided by 2. So here we go. If you look closely, actually the picker is not centered. In order to center, we need actually to specify justify content equal to center in the container view. So here we go. So right now, what is missing is that, of course, we need to translate on the horizontal axis this circle picker right here. And in order to do that, we need actually to use the PanGestureHandler. So let's define the PanGestureHandler and let's wrap everything. So here we need to import the PanGestureHandler from the React Native GestureHandler package. And we need to always wrap an animated view when dealing with a PanGestureHandler. So otherwise it will not work in the long run. So of course animated is imported from React Native Reanimated and not from React Native. So here, in order to get the PanGestureHandler work, we need to specify the onGesture event property. So let's actually define the PanGesture event. We need to use the useAnimatedGestureHandler. And here we can access some callbacks. So if you are not familiar with the useAnimatedGestureHandler, I highly recommend you to check out my previous video on the PanGestureHandler. I will put the video in the description. And actually, when we need to deal with the useAnimatedGestureHandler, we can actually handle a lot of different gesture handlers. For instance, we can actually handle the pinch gesture, the tap gesture, and the pan gesture. In our case, we are dealing with the PanGestureHandler, so we need to specify the PanGestureHandler gesture event type. Otherwise, it was, for instance, in the case of the pinch gesture, the PanGestureHandler gesture event type. So here we can access a bunch of callbacks. We can access, we need actually, in this example, to access the onStart callback, onActive callback, and the onEnd callback. So with the onActive callback, we can access actually the event, and we can access the translation X value. So, of course, right now nothing will work, but here we can see actually the logs of the translation X value. So the PanGestureHandler is set up correctly. What we want to do actually is to translate this view right here. And in order to do that, we need to define a shared value. Let's call it TranslateX. And the initial value will be equal to 0. We need to store inside the TranslateX value the event.translationX value, and we need to pass this TranslateX value to our view. So in order to do that, we need to handle a reanimated style. So let's create the reanimated style with the useAnimatedStyle hook, and we need to return a style with a TranslateX that depends actually on the TranslateX value. So this reanimated style will be passed to this component right here, but since it is a reanimated style, we need to convert this component right here in an animated view. So let's specify animated view right here, and actually we can pass the reanimated style. So here we go. So we can see that everything is working almost fine. But when we translate again, we can see actually that the picker is not working fine. And that's because we are not storing the previous position. So what we can do actually to handle the previous position. So basically, Reanimated allows us to store actually the previous position inside an object. This object is called context. So each callback will have a second parameter that will be the context. And inside this context, we can share a value between the onStart, the onActive, and the onEnd callback. So what we want to do is to retrieve inside the onStart callback the context object. And we want to retrieve actually inside the onStart callback the previous TranslateX value. And we want actually to calculate the next TranslateX value based on the current translation and the previous translation that is stored inside the context_x value. So here TypeScript is complaining because we didn't specify actually the context type. So the context type needs to be specified as a second parameter inside the generic. So let's specify it. Since we need just to deal with an x value, the context object will just have a single parameter that will be actually the x value. So let's reload and let's see if everything is working fine. So right now we can see actually that the picker is storing the previous position, but we have another issue. So when we go to the edges of the picker, we can see that we can translating. We can actually translate on the left and on the right. So we need to fix these issues right here. So I've already made a video where I fix a kind of similar issue. I will put the video in the video description. And let's see actually together how to fix it. So what I usually like to do is to create a copy of this TranslateX value as a derived value. So let's say adjust TranslateX. So adjust TranslateX will be derived from TranslateX value. So basically this value right here and this value right here right now are the same, but we can actually make some calculations before returning the TranslateX value inside the adjust TranslateX shared value. So let's actually log right here the TranslateX value to see something. So basically when we pan on the left, we can see that the TranslateX value is negative. When we drag on the right, we can see that it is positive. So basically, at the beginning, the first value will be 0, and we don't want to have negative values. So in order to do that, we can basically return, instead of the TranslateX value, we can return the max value between 0 and TranslateX value. So in that way, we will actually avoid the negative values. So let's actually pass this value right here to the style, and let's see if everything is working. So we can actually see that we are not allowed to translate to the X value. We can see that when we translate a lot and we retrieve the circle, it will need to wait a little bit to restore actually the animation. And that's because when we are retrieving the previous value in the context_x object, we need actually to retrieve not the TranslateX, but our new value, that is the adjust TranslateX value. So right now we have fixed the first issue, but let me see. So we can see actually that everything is working fine right now, but the second issue is on the right. So we need to avoid this behavior, and in order to avoid this behavior, we want to return the minimum value between this value right here and the max width of the picker So the picker width, let's say. So the picker width. So let's actually specify an additional parameter here. Let's say max width, and let's use the max width right here. So of course we need to specify the max width from the app component, and we know that the max width will be equal to the picker width that we defined at the beginning of the video. So let's say max width equal to picker width. So here we can see that everything is almost working fine, but basically right here the max width is a little bit too much. We want basically to reduce a little bit this amount by using basically the let's say the circle picker size. So let's say minus circle picker size. So right now we can see that everything is working nicely. So we can get rid of this log. So usually this function right here, this value, this calculation right here can be wrapped inside a specific function that usually is called clamp. For this video I will keep the logic right here, but if you want you can create a clamp worklet and reuse this function over and over. So what we are missing right now? So basically the animation is almost done, but of course we are missing the interpolation, and we are missing the scale animation and the TranslateY animation. So in order to handle the TranslateY animation and the scale animation, let's define actually other two shared values. So the first value will be TranslateY, the second value will be the scale shared value. The initial value of the TranslateY will be 0, the initial value of the scale value will be 1. So when we will start actually the animation, the TranslateY will be equal to, the TranslateY value will be equal to let's say minus circle picker size, and the scale value will be equal to 1.2. So basically the circle will go to the top here, for instance, and it will be a little bit bigger than before. So when we will complete the gesture, so on the end, the TranslateY value will return 0, and the scale value will return 1. So in order to get the things working, we need actually to pass right here the scale property and the TranslateY property. So I think that's fine. Let's reload actually. So of course right now nothing is animating, and that's because we are not using the with timing and with spring functions. So let's specify with spring. Of course you can use also with timing, but I think that the spring animation fits a little bit better for this specific use case. So let's say with spring 0 and with spring 1. So we can actually see that everything is working nicely. So what is missing? The final step actually is to animate the color inside the circle picker. So in order to do that, we need actually to wrap this animated view with another animated view that will actually be our internal picker. Let's say internal picker, and let's create actually the internal picker right here. So let's define the internal picker size that will be equal to circle picker size divided by 2. So let's replace basically these values. Let's use just the red color to see something, and let's avoid the position absolute. So right now, style internal picker styles, of course, styles dot internal picker. So here it is. We can see the internal picker. Of course, we need to center this picker. So let's say align items equal to center and justify content equal to center. So let's specify border width equal to 1 and border color equal to, let's say, almost black, but with a 0.1 opacity. Let's say 0.2 opacity. And let's get rid of our background color, because we will actually calculate this color right here later with the color interpolation. So here it is. And right now we can actually start to calculate our internal picker background color. So in order to handle this animation, of course, we need to create a reanimated style. Let's call it reanimated internal picker style. That will be useAnimated style. And we will return basically a background color. For now, let's just return a red color. So here we go. So we need to find actually a way to retrieve this background color, and this calculation will be handled by the interpolateColor function from React Native Reanimated. So I've already made a video on the interpolateColor function. I really recommend you to check out the video, but of course feel free to follow this video because I will explain everything step by step. So basically, the interpolateColor function is similar to the interpolate function. And in the interpolateColor function, we want to interpolate a value and map a specific value to a specific color. So what shared value we want to interpolate? Basically, we want to retrieve the background color based on our TranslateX value. So the first parameter of the interpolateColor value, the interpolateColor function, is actually the value. So our value will be the TranslateX value. So the second value will be our input range, and the third value will be our output range. So the output range will be an array of colors. So in our specific case, we need to pass right here the colors array. And in the input range, we need to specify the values, the numeric values that we will map in the color, in the specific color of the output range. So in order to understand better the interpolateColor function, I will use basically a dummy approach, and after I will fix it. So basically, let's copy every color right here. So don't worry, we will fix it in a while. It's just the dummy approach. And what we want to do basically is to define right here 9 numbers, and we want to map each number to a specific color. So basically we know that we want to reach the white color at the end, and we want to reach the red color at the beginning. And we want basically to calculate each value on the input range based on the percent amount that we have already scrolled with the TranslateX value. So basically what we want to do, we have 9 different colors. We want actually that our first value, when the TranslateX value is equal to 1 divided by 9 multiplied by the max width of the color picker, we want actually that the background color is equal to red. When the TranslateX value is equal to 2 divided by 9 multiplied by max width, so it is almost 20% of the color picker, we want to reach the purple color, so here it is. When we have when the TranslateX value is equal to 3 divided by 9 multiplied by max width, we want to reach the blue color, and so on and so forth. So let's do it again for 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. So don't worry again, of course we will not use this approach in the end, we will use a better solution, but let's see if this solution right here works. So let's return actually the background color, let's reload, and we can actually see that the color picker is working nicely. So how to use a better approach in this specific case? I think that of course for the colors output range we can use the colors array, and in order to get these values right here we can use the map function from JavaScript. So let's define the input range. The input range will be equal to colors.map. We need just the index, and we need to return index divided by colors.length, that is basically equal to 9, and everything needs to be multiplied by max width. So let's assign this input range right here. Let's reload. So we can see that everything is working perfectly. So basically this code right here, I've basically, of course, this code right here is almost equal to the previous one, but previously it was like 1 divided, so since the index will start from 0, it was 1 divided by 9, 2 divided by 9, and so on and so forth. But if we see closely, actually, the first value with 0, so 0 divided by 9, and so on and so forth, works a little bit better. So let's keep this mapping in that way. So right now, I think we are almost done, but we are missing the circle right here. So let's actually define the circle. This circle will be wrapped inside the top container. So let's create a view with style equal to styles.circle. And let's create the circle style. So here we need to specify the width, the height, and so on and so forth. And let's retrieve basically the circle size based on the screen width. Let's say width multiplied by 0.8. So let's specify the width, the height, the background color, let's say red for now. We need the border radius, so let's say circle size divided by 2. And of course we need to align it center, so let's say align items center, justify content center, and let's fix this background color right here. So here we go. So of course we are missing the most important part. We want actually that this color right here is equal to the color contained inside the color picker. So in order to do that, let's start actually to define the picked color equal to use shared value. So the initial value will be equal to colors 0. So it will be basically the red color. So since we want actually to pass this picked color to this view, we need to convert this view right here in an animated view. So we need to import animated from React Native Reanimated. And we need to define the reanimated style. So let's return as background color the picked color value. So here we go. Of course, we can get rid of this background color right here because we are handling the background color with the picked color shared value. So right now, what we are missing, of course, we want to update the background color with the color picker itself. So with the color inside the color picker. What I usually like to do, what what I usually like to do to achieve this kind of result is to create a kind of function, a kind of callback, for instance, on color changed. And here I like to update my picked color based on the color that I pass from this callback right here. So let's actually see what I'm talking about. So let's define first of all the onColorChanged callback here. Here we need to pass a color that will be a string or a number. So why a number? Because basically, of course, the colors can be red, purple, blue, and so on and so forth. But when we have a value between purple and blue, the value, of course, will be numeric, and therefore we need to say that the color is of type string or number. So we need to handle this callback. So let's say onColorChanged. And we need to pass the color value, the color property on this callback when we calculate basically the background color with the interpolateColor function. So let's call this function right here. So we need to pass actually the background color. So what is actually the idea, just to be clear? When we, from this component right here, we will pass the onColorChange function. We will handle the onColorChange right here, and we will pass as the color the background color that we have already retrieved from the interpolateColor function. So here onColorChanged, let's make it actually optional. So on the app component, we can actually use this callback right here. So let's define the onColorChange callback with useCallback. And let's actually import useCallback from React. So here we will have a color that will be a string or a number. And we can update the picked color value based on the color that we are passing from the other screen. So here, what's the issue? So here we need to specify that the shared value isn't of type string, but is of type string or number. So here we go. And we need to pass this onColorChanged function to the color picker. So right now we have our last issue, and our last issue is related to the fact that we are passing this function, that is actually a JavaScript function, inside this callback, and this callback is handled inside a useAnimated style hook. So basically the useAnimated style hook under the hood is a worklet. A worklet function is a specific function from Reanimated that it is automatically executed on the UI thread. A JavaScript function instead needs to be executed on the JavaScript thread. So if we want actually to call in a synchronous way the onColorChanged function, we need to specify that the onColorChanged is actually a worklet. So let's specify that the function is a worklet simply by using the worklet keyword on the top of the useCallback hook. Let's actually reload. And we can see that everything is working nicely. So this example seems almost end, but it isn't, because there is a small issue. So basically we have a PanGestureHandler, but we haven't the TapGestureHandler. And the TapGestureHandler, it is needed because when we tap, for instance, on the yellow color, we want that the picker jumps to the yellow color, and it updates automatically the value right here. So how we can achieve this result? In order to achieve this result, of course, we need to use a TapGestureHandler. So let's use the TapGestureHandler and let's wrap everything. We need to import the TapGestureHandler from React Native GestureHandler. When we use a gesture handler, we always need to wrap an animated view. So let's wrap the PanGestureHandler. And here, as before, we need to use the onGesture event property inside the TapGestureHandler. So basically, usually when dealing with the TapGestureHandler, we need just the onActivated property. But in this specific example, we need to deal with more callbacks. So in order to handle the different callbacks, it is better to use the onGesture event property. So let's actually specify the TapGesture event. So let's say TapGesture event. So as before, we will use the useAnimatedGestureHandler hook. So let's say useAnimatedGestureHandler. And here we need to pass the TapGestureHandler gesture event. So here we go. We need to deal just with two different callbacks, and the first callback will be on start, the second callback will be the on end callback. We need, of course, to pass the TapGesture event to the onGesture event callback. So here we go. So basically what we want to do, when we start actually to tap, we want the same animations that we have right here. So let's copy this animation. And we want that the TranslateX value automatically changed to the event.absoluteX value. So let's reload actually. So we can actually see that it is almost working. There are, of course, we are missing the with timing function. We can use, of course, the with spring, but I think it doesn't fit for this example. So I prefer for this specific use case to use the with timing function. And in order to align actually the picker, let's say event.absoluteX minus circle picker size. So we can actually see that the onStart callback is working perfectly. So in the onEnd callback, we want basically to do the same stuff that we did on the onEnd callback of the PanGesture event. So here we go. So here you can see that the animation is working nicely, but we can do a little bit of refactoring. So right now, the issue is that we are repeating a lot our code. So basically, the onStart of the TapGesture event has a higher priority above the onStart of the PanGesture event in our case. And therefore, this translation and these animations right here are not needed anymore, because automatically when we tap or when we pan, the onStart callback of the TapGesture event will be triggered. So let's see it just to see, let's see actually. So we can see that everything is working fine. And of course, we are repeating ourselves for the onEnd callback. So here, actually, both callbacks are needed. And in order to handle both callbacks, since the code is the same, we can create an onEnd callback. So an onEnd function by using the use callback hook from React. And here we can use the same code. So let's assign this function right here and right here. So right now we will have an issue. So basically, what's the issue? The issue is the same as before. So basically, by default, when we are using the useAnimatedGestureHandler hook, React Native automatically reanimated handles the fact that the on-end callback is a worklet function. But right now we are defining the on-end callback right here, and this on-end callback is a JavaScript function. So we want to call this function right here in a synchronous way as before. So in order to call it in a synchronous way and execute this function on the UI thread, we need to specify the worklet keyword right here. So let's see if everything is working. So as we can see, everything is working perfectly. So thanks a lot to staying with me all that time. I hope that you learned something. And I hope that if you like this kind of videos, you subscribe to the channel. So thanks a lot.